His mother had seen James digging in the cornfield with his bare hands when he was 4 years old. She had found him there at dawn. There was dirt under his fingernails and tears on his face. He kept whispering the same sentence over and over. The men in blue are coming. We must hide the gold before they burn everything. His mother pulled him away from the hole he was digging in the ground, but he screamed as if he had been pulled from his own grave. I buried it here. I remember the tree. I remember the fire. The Morrisons had lived in rural Georgia for 3 generations, but they had never found anything more valuable than arrowheads in those fields. They had no ancestors who fought for the Confederacy. There were no family stories about buried treasure, yet their son spoke with the conviction of a dying man guarding his last secret. What shocked his mother was the certainty of the details. She described a wooden chest bound with iron straps, marked with a seal she had never seen in any book. She gave the name of a regiment that wouldn't appear in history lessons for another 8 years. She knew exactly where to dig. You were about to witness a case that forced historians to rewrite what they knew about the lost Confederate treasure and caused a family to question everything they believed about the nature of memory. The Morrison family lived in a modest farmhouse outside the town of Macon, Georgia, surrounded by red clay and pine trees. Daniel Morrison worked as an electrician in town. Emma was a second-grade teacher at the local elementary school. Their son James was an easy baby. He started walking early. By age 2, he was forming complete sentences. He showed no signs of anything unusual until the morning of his 4th birthday. It all started with drawings. One afternoon, Emma found drawings scattered on the kitchen table. A box with straps, a tree with its trunk split open, men in uniforms. When she asked James what he was drawing, he looked at her with a disturbing expression. He looked at her with an expression too mature for his little face. I am drawing my hiding place, Mom. Emma didn't think much of it. Children have rich imaginations. James wasn't even in school yet. He was saying things a child shouldn't know. The Confederate treasure, the Union cavalry, and General Sherman's march. Emma and Daniel weren't interested in history. There were no Civil War mementos in their home, no books on the subject, nothing that could explain where their 4-year-old son had learned these words. When they asked him where he had heard these terms, James tilted his head in bewilderment. I was there. I was Captain William Rutherford, I remember. This name meant nothing to them. They searched the internet. They found some information about a Confederate officer who had served in Georgia. However, the records were incomplete due to the passage of time and the chaos of the Lost War. What troubled them most was what happened next. James stopped playing and stared into the distance. He began to speak as if recounting a memory. He described the sound of cannon fire echoing like thunder across the hills. He spoke of the taste of hard bread and the smell of horses. He wept for his family left behind, his wife Catherine and 2 daughters he would never see grow up. Then he started talking about gold. According to James, in early 1865, as Union forces approached Georgia, part of the Confederate treasury had been entrusted to him. We knew we were losing. Our cause was lost, but the gold must not fall into their hands. The gold was something to be used after the war to rebuild and care for families. He recounted how they loaded the heavy wooden chests onto a wagon at midnight, the mules straining under the weight. He remembered the exact date, the 3rd of April, 1865. He remembered traveling 17 miles southeast of Macon, and he remembered the tree with its split trunk, which he had tried to draw helplessly with his childish hands. Daniel wanted to take his son to a psychiatrist. Emma wanted to talk to their pastor. But before they could decide, James did something that changed everything. On a cool March morning, he went to the cornfield. He stopped at a random spot 30 meters from the house. He began digging with the garden spade he had taken from the shed. When Emma found him, his hands were bleeding. His face was wet with tears. He was muttering meaningless coordinates. I'll go 40 paces south from the twin oak trees. I'll go 20 paces east toward the bend in the stream. The tree is gone now, but this is the place. Emma's heart was racing. She knelt down beside her son. Baby, why are you digging here? James looked at her. Emma didn't recognize her own son. Because I died before I could go back and get him. I was shot in a skirmish 3 days after we buried him. I couldn't tell anyone where he was, and now I remember everything. That night, Daniel Morrison sat in his living room. He made a decision. He called a local historian, a professor named Dr. Ellen Marsh, who specialized in the Civil War in Georgia. He told her about his son, William Rutherford, and the impossible details. He expected her to laugh. Instead, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Dr. Marsh finally spoke, her voice was careful and measured. "Mr. Morrison, I need to meet your son. Because if he knows what I think he knows, it could change everything we know about the lost Confederate gold." Dr. Ellen Marsh arrived at the Morrison farm 3 days later. With her was a man named Dr. Vincent Caroway, a psychology professor from Emory University who specialized in childhood memories. Dr. Caroway was a skeptical man by profession and disposition. He had spent his career debunking the authenticity of past life memories. He had spent his life uncovering how well-meaning parents could unknowingly implant false memories in their children's minds. He carried a leather bag filled with photographs, maps, and carefully crafted questions designed to reveal inconsistencies. He had agreed to come as a favor to Dr. Marsh. He made no effort to hide his skepticism. When they arrived, James was playing with toy cars in the living room. He looked at them with mild curiosity. He didn't show much interest. Dr. Caroway sat down opposite James. He laid out his materials on the coffee table with methodical precision. "Hello, James. I hear you remember some interesting things. Can you tell me about them?" James put down his toy car. The expression on his face changed. His cheerfulness vanished. "You don't believe me. You think I am making it up or that my family taught me what to say." Dr. Caroway's smile faded. He looked at Emma Morrison, who nodded. "We never discussed this with him," she said. The professor regained his composure. He pulled out a stack of photographs. "I am going to show you some photos, James. If you recognize anything, I want you to tell me." He laid out 6 photos of Confederate soldiers from Georgia regiments, all roughly the same age and build, on the table. "Do you recognize any of these men?" James didn't hesitate. He pointed to the 3rd photo from the left. "That is me. Captain William Rutherford, 3rd Georgia Cavalry Regiment." Dr. Marsh took a sharp breath. The photo James had chosen was indeed of William Rutherford. However, this photo came from a private collection. It was an unknown photo, never published in any book or shared online. It was impossible for a 4-year-old child to have seen this photograph. Dr. Caroway continued. "What was the name of his horse?" "His name was Traveler. He was a brown mare with a white star on his forehead. He started to limp in the winter of 1864. I had to kill him myself. It broke my heart." "What did you eat for breakfast the day you buried the gold?" "I didn't have breakfast that day. There was no time. The night before, we had corn porridge, but it had bugs in it. By then, most of our food had gone bad." "What was your wife's name?" James's face took on a sorrowful expression. "Catherine Ann Bellamy. We were married in June 1857 at the Presbyterian Church in Savannah. She wore her mother's dress. Our daughters' names were Mary and Elizabeth. I couldn't say goodbye to them." Dr. Caroway leaned back. He pulled out a 1865 Georgia map. He spread it on the table. "Show me where you buried the treasure." James leaned forward with his little finger. He traced a route southeast from Macon to an area marked as farmland. He stopped at a point within the Morrison property. "Here 17 miles southeast of Macon, near a creek that dries up in summer. Years ago, there was a massive oak tree split in 2 by lightning. We buried 3 chests, 5 feet deep. The largest had a regimental seal on its iron band. That is how you'll know it is the real one." Dr. Marsh was frantically taking notes. Dr. Caroway was silently watching the boy. Finally, he spoke quietly. "James, do you realize what you are saying? You are saying you remember dying. I remember the field hospital. I remember the surgeon telling me the bullet had pierced my lung. I remember the smell of blood and chloroform. I remember thinking about Catherine and the girls. I remember wondering if someone would find the gold or if it would stay buried forever. I don't remember what happened after that. When time passed, I woke up again here, in this body, in this life. I remembered everything." The room fell into an odd silence. Emma Morrison was quietly crying. Daniel stood with a pale face. Dr. Caroway closed his bag. "We need to dig there. If there is nothing there, we'll know everything. No matter how convincing it is, we can conclude it is a detailed fantasy. But if there is something," he didn't finish his sentence. Dr. Marsh nodded. "I'll contact the Georgia Historical Society. We'll need ground-penetrating radar, an archaeology team, and permits. Getting everything organized properly could take weeks." James looked at them for a moment. He was just a tired 4-year-old. "It is buried there. I promise. I've been waiting 160 years to show it to someone." 3 weeks later, on a damp morning in early May, a team of archaeologists, historians, and volunteers gathered on the Morrisons' property. They had brought ground-penetrating radar equipment, excavation tools, and sufficient documentation to meet the legal requirements for digging on private land. Local news had heard about this story. A curious crowd had gathered at the property line. Daniel and Emma Morrison had taken time off work. James stood at the edge of the cornfield in his rubber boots. He pointed to the spot he had tried to dig with his bare hands months earlier. The radar operator moved the equipment over the area, scanning back and forth in a grid pattern. The screen showed layers of soil, rock, and root system. Then, at about 7 feet deep, the readings changed. There was something there, something dense and rectangular, not part of Georgia Clay's natural geology. The operator looked at Dr. Marsh and nodded. The excavation began. The team worked carefully. Lifting the soil layer, they sifted through the earth to find artifacts. James watched silently. His small hand tightly held his mother's. An hour passed. The pit deepened. The sun rose. Then one of the archaeologists' shovels struck something hard with a hollow sound echoing across the field. The team was startled. Dr. Marsh descended into the pit. He cleared the soil with his hands. His fingers found an old, partially decayed, but still solid piece of wood. Cleaning away the soil, he revealed rusted iron strips that had turned green over time, but still held the wood together. And there, just as James had described, was a seal stamped into the metal. The letters CSA had been rusted for over a century. Dr. Caroway stood at the edge of the pit. All color had drained from his face. "My God, it is real," he said. The excavation team worked with the meticulousness of surgeons that afternoon. Each shovel full of dirt was removed with painstaking precision. The wooden chest was larger than anyone had expected. It was nearly 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. Iron straps formed a grid across its surface. The wood had turned almost black. Some sections were completely rotten. However, it was structurally sound. When they finally lifted it from the ground, it took 3 people to carry it to the surface. It was very heavy. Dr. Marsh ordered a tent to be set up over the area to protect the crate from the weather and prying eyes. The crowd gathered at the property line, and word that something important had been found in the small community had reached nearly 50 people. Local police had arrived to maintain order. A news vehicle arrived from Atlanta. The camera crew came out. But inside the tent, away from the chaos, there was only silence as the crew gathered around the crate. James slipped through the adults, his small body sliding between their legs. He came right in front of the artifact. He reached out and touched the worn seal with one finger. With a gentleness that seemed inappropriate for a child, he traced the letters CSA. "Be careful when you open it. The locking mechanism is on the right side, but it is probably rusted. We also sealed it with wax. But that is long gone." Dr. Caroway knelt down beside him. His previous skepticism was completely gone. "James, how do you know about the wax seal? That detail wasn't in your previous statements." The boy looked at him with very old eyes. "Because I sealed it. I remember melting the beeswax over the campfire. I remember burning my thumb. I remember everything about that night, the doctor and the fear. I remember thinking this gold might be important someday." The team's conservation specialist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, examined the crate with a handheld microscope and various tools. She took photographs from every angle. She documented the condition of the artifacts before attempting to open the crate. American chestnut wood, commonly used in military supply crates in the 1860s. The ironwork is consistent with Confederate manufacturing, and judging by the style of the hinges, it likely belongs to the Richmond Armory. And this seal is the proof. This is a genuine Confederate States Treasury mark. I've only seen these in archive photos. Dr. Marsh made the decision. We're opening the box, but we'll do it properly. Dr. Chen, you take the lead. Everyone else, document everything. The expert selected a thin crowbar. He carefully inserted it under the lid, where the wood was rotten and hollow. The metal made a creaking sound that made everyone wince. As James had predicted, the lock was rusted shut. It offered no resistance. Dr. Chen slowly and carefully lifted the lid upward. Surprisingly, the hinges still worked. With one last creak of the metal, the chest opened. Inside were gold bars wrapped in what appeared to be dark-colored rags. They were neatly arranged in rows. Each bore stamps indicating they were Confederate Treasury gold coins minted in 1864. The bars were small by modern standards. Each weighed about 5 pounds. But there were dozens of them. Their surfaces had dulled over time. They were undoubtedly valuable. The team stood in stunned silence. James had been telling the truth. Everything he had said, every seemingly impossible detail, was true. But there was more. Beneath the top layer of gold bars, Dr. Chen found something wrapped in what looked like leather. He carefully lifted it. The leather was miraculously well preserved. Inside was a diary, its pages yellowed and brittle but still legible. Dr. Marsh took it with trembling hands. He opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant, despite an obvious haste. The ink had turned brown, but it was still legible. At the top of the first page was a name and a date: Captain William Rutherford, the 3rd of April, 1865. Emma Morrison let out a sound somewhere between gasping and sobbing. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. James remained motionless. He watched the journal as if it were his own gravestone. Dr. Marsh began to read aloud in a trembling voice. "If you are reading this, I am dead. The war we fought to preserve our way of life has been lost. I cannot forgive what we have done, what we have become. But the oath I swore to protect what remains compels me to do this. This chest contains part of the Confederate treasury entrusted to me by General Hardee, who ordered me to hide it from Union forces. I buried it 17 miles southeast of Macon, near the creek where the old lightning-struck oak tree stands. When this conflict ends, I pray that this gold will be used to rebuild what we have destroyed, and to care for the widows and orphans our war has created." The diary continues for several more pages. It details the journey from Macon, the names of the soldiers who helped dig the hole, the weight of the gold, and the fear that Union cavalry were only a few hours behind. And on the last page, there is an entry dated the 6th of April, 1865. "This morning we were ambushed by Union scouts. I was shot. The surgeon says my wound is fatal. I am writing this at the field hospital in Jonesboro. I feel my life slowly slipping away. My greatest regret is not the gold, but that I will never see Catherine and my daughters again. I will never hold them again. I will never tell them how much I love them again. The gold can remain buried forever. But God, let me see my family one more time." The diary ended there. The handwriting had become an illegible scribble. Dr. Marsh gently closed the diary. He looked at James. Tears were streaming down the boy's face. Dr. Caroway, who had built his career on rational explanations and scientific skepticism, was clearly crying. "This is impossible, but it is all true." James approached the chest. He placed both hands on its edge. "I never made it home. I died in that hospital thinking Catherine would never know what happened to me, that my daughters would grow up believing I had abandoned them. I carried that pain for 160 years. But now I've come back. I got a second chance, and I was finally able to tell someone where I hid her. I kept my promise." Dr. Marsh knelt beside him. He took his hand. "You kept your promise, Captain. You kept your promise. And now the world will know what you did and why you did it. Your family will finally understand that you never abandoned them." James nodded. He smiled for the first time since the excavation began. It was the smile of someone who had carried an unbearable burden and was finally allowed to let it go. The discovery sent shockwaves through the academic community and beyond. The crate and its contents were transported to the Georgia Historical Society, escorted by armed guards. Here, experts confirmed what Dr. Marsh and his team already knew. This was the real Confederate gold treasure. part of the legendary lost shipment historians had debated for over a century. The diary was verified by handwriting analysts, compared with other known documents signed by Captain William Rutherford. Every detail matched. The dates, locations, names of fellow soldiers, even the description of his fatal wound, perfectly aligned with the fragmented military records that survived the chaos at the end of the war. However, what happened in the months following the discovery was truly inexplicable. Genealogists affected by this event began researching the ancestry of Captain William Rutherford and the Morrison family. They hoped to find a connection, a genetic link, that could explain how the ancestors' memories might have been passed down through the generations. But what they found made the story even more nonsensical. There was no connection. None. There was no branch in the Morrison family tree that intersected with the Rutherford family lineage. Daniel Morrison's ancestors had emigrated from Scotland in the early 1900s. Emma's family, on the other hand, had Irish roots that came even later. There was no biological reason for James to have access to William Rutherford's memories, yet he could. With this discovery, turning his entire worldview upside down, Dr. Caroway spent the next year intensively studying James. With the family's permission, he documented how the child's memories began to fade as he grew older, as if William Rutherford's identity was slowly losing its effect. By the time James turned 7, he could no longer recall the details he had once described so clearly. He said he remembered them, but the memories had become distant and dreamlike. It was as if the power that had allowed the Confederate captain's consciousness to briefly inhabit a child's mind had served its purpose and withdrawn. The gold became the subject of intense legal and ethical debate. Who did it belong to? The Morrison family, who owned the land where it was found? The state of Georgia? The descendants of the Confederate soldiers? Ultimately, a judge ruled that the gold should be displayed in a museum and that a portion of its value should be given to the Morrison family because of the historical significance of their cooperation and discovery. Daniel and Emma used the money to establish a college fund for James and to donate to historical preservation societies. They did not want to profit from their son's experiences. James, meanwhile, grew up to be a quiet and thoughtful child, showing little interest in the Civil War or history in general. The memories that once consumed him became things he spoke of only rarely and when asked. However, the diary revealed one final truth that brought some measure of peace to the story. Researchers found the grandchildren of the captain's widow, Catherine Bellamy Rutherford. They shared the contents of her final diary entries with them. They learned that Catherine believed her husband had abandoned his family and died in 1889, in pain and alone, never knowing what had become of them. However, the great-granddaughter of Sarah Mitchell, who lives in Charleston, read the diary entries and wept. He didn't abandon them. He tried to come home. He was thinking of them when he died. They never knew this, but now we do. Now we finally know. The case of James Morrison and the Confederate Gold remains one of the most detailed and inexplicable examples of past life memories ever recorded. Skeptics argue that there must be an unknown variable that explains how a 4-year-old child in the 21st century could have such detailed knowledge of events in 1865. Believers, however, point to physical evidence, the diary, the gold, and the certainty of James's claims. They argue that it proves consciousness can transcend death, that memories can somehow survive the destruction of the body that created them. Dr. Ellen Marsh, who studied this case for years, explained her conclusion in an article published in the Journal of Historical Studies. We may never understand how James Morrison knew what he knew, but we cannot deny that he knew it. The evidence is undeniable. Call it reincarnation, genetic memory, or something else entirely. This case forces us to confront the possibility that the relationship between memory, identity, and death is far more complex than we imagined. Now a young man, James has largely left behind this experience that defined his childhood. Yet on quiet nights when his parents check on him before bed, they sometimes catch him staring out the window at the cornfield where the box was, a distant look on his face. When they ask what he is thinking, he usually says nothing. At 12, he gave a different answer. I think about Catherine and her daughters. I hope they had a good life. I hope they knew, somehow, that I never stopped loving them. The gold is on display in museums in the South, always accompanied by the story of the boy who remembered the diary and where it was hidden. Thousands of people stood before that rusted trunk, wondering at the mysteries of memory, death, and the strange persistence of the human spirit. Some left skeptical, convinced there must be a logical explanation waiting to be discovered. Others left shaken, forced to rethink everything they thought they knew about the nature of consciousness. But everyone who hears this story must face the same question. If a 4-year-old child can remember dying in a field hospital during the Civil War, if he can lead historians to a treasure lost for over 150 years, if he can prove beyond doubt that he possesses information that should be impossible to obtain, what does that mean for us? What memories might we be carrying without knowing it? What lives might we have lived before this one? And when we die, what part of us continues? If you believe that James Morrison truly carried Captain William Rutherford's memories in silence for over a century, let me know in the comments. If you think this is a detailed coincidence that science will one day explain, share your thoughts with me. And if you want to join us on a journey into more mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the impossible permanence of memory, subscribe now. Because the next story we uncover might be even more unsettling than this one. The question is, are you ready to question everything you believe about the nature of reality?